The ghost load arrived under escort just after sunrise, its matte panels streaked with desert grime and heat stress. The convoy had backed in tight, 3 standard transports flanking the hybrid Humvee like armor. The vehicle was taller than most, heavier too, with its composite shielding and internal silence mode wiring. Even parked, it looked like it still carried motion. At Lockridge Tactical Depot, the noise of work never really stopped. But that morning, a kind of hush settled around Bay 3. Rey had been sweeping dust out from under the bench grinders when she heard the brakes hiss and the boots hit gravel. She stood up, slid the broom under the cabinet, and pulled off her gloves. Nobody called her name. They never did. She just walked toward the edge of the bay, wiping her hands on the side of her coveralls as she went. From a distance, the ghost load looked like any other advanced Humvee retrofit. Up close, it was different. The air around it felt loaded. Half its seams were non-standard, covered in matte thermoskin composite. No tags, no registration, no crew markings. It carried the kind of anonymity that said classified. The man stepping down from the passenger side confirmed it. Tall, sharp-jawed, hair cut close enough to show the curve of his skull. His name was Blake, and everyone already knew it. Word had gone around the depot the night before. SEAL team inbound. Hardware failure suspected. Do not touch unless invited. Owen came out from the side office before Rey could speak. He always moved fast when officers were in play, clipboard tucked to his chest like a shield. Nate and Logan had already set down their coffee mugs and were walking fast but casual toward the bay, acting like they had been there the whole time. Blake's boots hit the concrete with the kind of weight people noticed. He didn't bother looking at Rey as he passed. He spoke while facing Owen. "I asked for your best mechanic." Owen gave a short, uncertain chuckle. "Of course, that's Nate. He'll handle it." Blake turned his head then, eyes cutting sharp toward Rey, who had stepped beside the ghost load's hood and was already reading the first thermal output scan from her tablet. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Your drive sync is off, just slightly, but it'll cascade under torque if the weather cycle's cold to hot too fast." Blake stared. So did Nate. Logan scratched the back of his neck. Owen winced. Rey looked up from the diagnostic feed. The ghost load was bleeding power. The readout wasn't subtle. It was losing thermal consistency across its dual relay bridge. If no one fixed it, it would lock up the next time it ran stealth mode over variable terrain. She offered the clipboard forward, not to be dramatic, just because the readout was clear. Blake didn't take it. Instead, he gave a short laugh and gestured toward her with an open palm. "Thought I asked for an actual mechanic," he said, "not a uniform cosplayer." Nate made a sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. Logan stepped back 2 paces and turned away. Owen opened his mouth, closed it, then gave Blake a tight smile. Rey's sharp Owen said, "Low, good with the boards." "Then she can go back to sweeping the floor," Blake said. "Get me someone who knows what this thing actually is." Rey stood still. She didn't blink. She watched the diagnostic data scroll on the tablet beside the dash. Torque readings were dropping incrementally as the core tried to compensate. The cascade had already begun. "Thermal bridge is desyncing," she repeated. "If it goes uncorrected, you'll lose 50% traction and most of your stealth profile. You won't hear it go. You'll just stop moving." Blake walked over, took the clipboard from her hand without looking at it, and passed it to Nate. "I'll let your expert take it from here." Rey's hand remained out for half a second longer than it should have. She pulled it back, dusted off her palm against her coveralls, and turned without another word. As she walked toward the back of the depot, the sound of the ghost load systems whirring down followed her. The hiss of air compressors returned to the background. Nate's voice carried low as he asked what fault code she had seen. Logan muttered something about not getting involved. Owen made a noise like reassurance, but it didn't carry weight. Rey slipped behind the side partition near the parts inventory room and leaned one hand against the edge of the tool cabinet. Her breath came steady. Her eyes closed once, not in defeat, just to recalibrate. Inside her left breast pocket was a slip of paper with the ghost load's original voltage signature printed from memory. She had written it down the moment the convoy pulled up. She had designed that signature 3 years ago. But none of them knew that. She could hear Blake talking now, asking for a secondary rig to run checks. He mentioned heat drift, a phrase he clearly didn't understand. Nate replied in soft terms, trying not to contradict him, trying to sound useful. Rey didn't blame them. She understood the rules. They weren't written down, but they might as well have been etched into the floor. Don't challenge a seal in public. Don't be the one who knows too much too fast. Don't be the woman who makes the man with rank look small. Still, the data was already logging itself to the depot's diagnostic servers. Anyone who looked would see the fault sequence she marked, but no one would look, because no one had asked her to look in the first place. A tool dropped in Bay 4, and the sound echoed through the steel walls. The lights above flickered once, then stabilized. Outside, the wind pushed hard against the edge of the hangar. Rey didn't go back into the bay. She didn't offer again. She returned to the far bench and began sorting torque caps by hand. Slowly, each one rotated precisely into its case. Her fingers were steady, her breath even. She wasn't angry, not yet. But she had seen something no one else saw. And sooner or later, the ghost load would show them what happened when you ignored the data. And by then, it would be too late to pretend it hadn't spoken. Rey's apartment sat above the old parts store at the edge of the rail yard, the kind of place most people overlooked. It had a single window that faced west, a cracked tile kitchen, and floors that creaked no matter how light she stepped. Nothing on the walls, nothing on the counters, just tools, sorted by type. Precision instruments sealed in cases that looked like they belonged in a lab instead of a second-story walk-up. She dropped her canvas bag by the door and shut it gently behind her. The silence inside wasn't peaceful. It never was. It was held breath, layered with memory. She turned on the lamp over the workbench. It gave off a low hum and soft yellow glow, enough to trace familiar edges. On the far shelf sat a locked steel box. She hesitated, then walked to it and turned the latch. Inside were items no one at Lockridge Depot had ever seen. Military-calibrated circuit spanners, dual-core torque readers with scratched serial codes. Every piece had been cleaned, packed, stored like memory was dangerous. At the bottom of the box was a flat packet wrapped in oilcloth. She unfolded it carefully. The top schematic was labeled Ghost Load Variant 1.2, proprietary. Her name was written in the corner in faded black ink, surrounded by small handwritten annotations in the margins. Torque yield equations, power bleed corrections, data tags marked with personal shorthand only she understood. Her breath caught for just a second as she traced her thumb along the page. She had written this on the floor of a hangar 4 years earlier, before everything had gone sideways. A soft buzz broke the quiet. She turned. Her old phone was vibrating on the shelf. Not her daily phone, the black one. The one with no contacts and no ringer. Just a dark glass screen and a single message thread that had been dormant for months. The message said only, "You touched the Humvee. They'll come back." Rey stared at the screen. Her jaw didn't move. She let the message disappear into silence and powered the phone off. There was no point in answering. Whoever sent it already knew she wouldn't run. She reached into the second drawer of the bench, pulled out a small wrench with the initials R.A.M. faintly etched near the handle. The letters had been scratched over, half removed in a moment she barely remembered anymore. She held the tool in one hand, balanced its weight, then set it down on the schematic. On the far wall, taped near the fuse box, hung an unopened envelope. It had been there for a year. The handwriting belonged to Frank, her former legal contact, the only person who still knew where she lived. He had sent it certified, probably assuming she'd read it right away. She hadn't. Whatever was in it could wait, just like it always had. She pulled the stool out and sat, letting her weight settle slowly. She looked at the ghost load schematic again and remembered the last time she had worked on it. It had been in a lab so clean it smelled like bleach. She had worn gloves then, logged every detail into the Halden, Mobility, Core, servers. Every design nuance, every workaround for torque loss at high elevation, every error in the company's original blueprint had been flagged and corrected by her team. But when the project went public, her name had vanished. Grant had walked onto that stage with a printed deck of her data and smiled for the cameras. He had rebranded the entire system under his own name and stood behind a row of officials who shook his hand. Rey hadn't been there. She had been sitting in a conference room 3 floors down, signing a non-disclosure agreement while Frank tried to negotiate severance. The choice had been simple. Accept the settlement, stay silent for 5 years, and walk away. Or fight. lose everything, and be blacklisted across every defense contractor in the country. She chose silence. For a while, it had worked. She moved to the edge of nowhere, changed her last name, took the first job Owen offered at Lockridge. She told herself she didn't miss the lab, that she didn't care about recognition. That peace was better than vindication. But watching Blake wave away her clipboard that morning had cracked something loose. And the diagnostic log she ran before walking away told her the truth. The system failure wasn't minor. It wasn't theoretical. That Humvee was going to stall. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But it would happen. Ray stood and walked to the window. The rail yard below was empty. A single security light flickered above the fuel shed. In the distance, something metal clanged as a container door shifted in the wind. It was the kind of sound that reminded her of late nights in test bays, running simulations on cables that buzzed faintly under pressure. Those nights were long gone. She turned back to the workbench and folded the schematic again, not because she was done with it, because she wasn't sure what came next. Her past was catching up, but this time, it wasn't arriving with lawsuits or press releases. It was arriving with whisper warnings and sealed vehicles and torque patterns she had memorized because she had written them into the core firmware. She slid the schematic into a file and locked the box again. Then she picked up the scratched wrench and set it in the middle of the bench, beside a blank page and a sharpened pencil. She didn't know exactly when they would come, but she knew they would, and when they did, she was done pretending not to remember how to build. The unmarked sedan rolled past the main gate at Lockridge Tactical Depot just before 10 in the morning. It didn't idle. It didn't hesitate. The guards waved it through without a word, and the vehicle slid into a tight space near Bay 1 with mechanical precision. The sun caught the edge of the passenger mirror just long enough to reflect against the glass of the side office, making Owen squint as he stepped out with a clipboard tucked under one arm. Ray watched from the edge of the machine bay. She had already stripped and cleaned 3 torque assemblies that morning, trying to keep her hands busy and her thoughts quiet. But the moment the black sedan appeared, silence swept across the depot like a cold wind. Nate straightened near the compressor wall. Logan set his coffee down without finishing it. Even Eli looked up from his parts bin. 2 men stepped out of the car. Both wore dark suits, no ties. One carried a flat case, the kind used to protect sensitive devices. The other kept his hands loose and visible, walking like someone who expected people to notice him but didn't care whether they did. They conferred quietly with Owen, then scanned the bay. "Ray," Owen called, not loudly, but clearly. They'd like a word. She wiped her hands on a rag and walked over without asking questions. One of the men stepped forward and offered a card she didn't take. "Mason," he said. "This is Reed. We're with Federal Oversight. We'd like to speak with you privately." Owen looked uncertain, torn between protocol and discomfort. "The break room's open." Mason nodded, and Ray followed them inside. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and axle grease. A whiteboard listed shift assignments from 2 weeks ago. No one sat. Mason closed the door and gestured to the nearest chair. "You flagged a desync loop on the ghost load yesterday," he said. "No introduction, no preamble. You spotted it before the diagnostics did." Ray met his eyes. "Yes." Reed opened the flat case and slid a tablet across the table. "Explain how—" Ray glanced at the screen. The ghost load's firmware was displayed in diagnostic scroll, clean lines of embedded code arranged like sheet music. In the middle of the page, highlighted in green, was a string labeled Ray 07X. She let out a slow breath, not surprise, not fear, just recognition. "I didn't access anything," she said. "I recognized my own signature." Mason's eyes narrowed. "You're saying you wrote that control sequence?" "I'm saying I designed the original system that uses it." Reed tapped the tablet. "This string appears in the classified firmware governing hybrid torque balance during stealth operations. It's not in any open source library, not in any contractor documentation. It shouldn't be visible to non-cleared personnel. And yet you flagged the fault before any official repair request." "I designed that logic loop 4 years ago," Ray said. "It was built to bypass power bleed under terrain-adjusted silence mode. The bug you're seeing now didn't exist in the initial version. Someone patched it wrong." Mason leaned back. "You're not listed on any version control documents. Not as contributor, not as lead, not as testing staff." "I know." Outside the door, Footsteps passed and paused. Owen was likely hovering, pretending to inventory spark caps while trying to listen through the wall. Rey kept her voice even. I worked at Halden Mobility. I was part of the initial propulsion integration team. When my torque calibration model outperformed theirs by 100.0% in simulation, they ran with it. Then they scrubbed my credentials from the archive before rollout. Reed glanced at Mason. Name. Rey Morgan. They dropped the full name in the cleanup. Mason pulled out a second device, entered something with swift precision, then paused as he read the response. He looked back at Rey with something between frustration and respect. There's no active record of you in the DoD archive, but your name is attached to one early research file tagged as proprietary prototype. The file was closed under a non-disclosure clause and settled out of court. Rey nodded once. Correct. So, you're telling us, Reed said slowly, that the person sweeping the bay floor yesterday just happens to be the original architect of one of the Pentagon's most sensitive vehicle control systems. Yes. Mason didn't blink. And you never told anyone here? There was nothing to tell. I was hired to change filters and keep my head down. From the corner of her eye, Rey saw Reed reading again. He tapped the screen, scrolled, and paused. Colonel Lane's name is attached to this file. We'll need to escalate. Do what you need to do, Rey said. They were quiet for a beat too long. Then Mason stood. We'll confirm your identity through secure channels. If what you're saying is true, you're not just a technician. You're the design lead for a national defense asset. Rey didn't answer. She didn't need to. The door opened behind them. Owen stepped in, trying to look casual but failing. Everything all right? Mason turned to him. We'll be contacting your chain of command. Miss Morgan's role here may need to be reevaluated. Owen looked from the agents to Rey. His face was hard to read, somewhere between panic and realization. Rey, he said, voice quieter than usual. What did you bring into my shop? She stood slowly. Nothing you didn't already have. I just recognized it. Reed packed the tablet. We'll be in touch. They walked out without another word. The garage outside had fallen completely silent. Nate stood near the tire lift, one hand resting on a breaker bar like he had forgotten why he was holding it. Logan looked up and looked away. Eli was watching the door. Owen remained by the break room table. Not quite sitting. Not quite leaving. You really wrote that system, he asked. No accusation. Just the weight of disbelief. Rey didn't smile. I built something good. Then I watched someone else put their name on it. Owen ran a hand through his hair. They're going to want more than diagnostics now. I know. You really just wanted to stay invisible. Rey looked at him, calm and still. For a while, I thought that was the only way to stay safe. The sound of the agent's sedan pulling away echoed against the hangar walls. When it faded, the bay returned to work in slow motion. Tools lifted, machines restarted, but nothing sounded quite the same. Not anymore. The Humvee's tires were still coated in pale dust when Blake stormed into the depot, shoulders squared, jaw locked, and voice already raised. His crew trailed behind, none of them saying a word. The heat outside had broken into a muggy overcast, and the bay lights buzzed faintly overhead, as if picking up on the tension. You almost got my team stranded, Blake said, stopping halfway between the ghost load and the nearest lift. His voice echoed against the steel walls. That truck bucked power under load. It dropped torque in the middle of a canyon crawl. No warning, no fail-safe. You want to explain that? The entire depot went still. Nate froze by the compressor. Logan stood halfway through organizing a parts rack. Owen stepped out of the side office, face tight, already wary of where the scene was going. Rey set down her socket wrench on the bench and wiped her hands slowly. She didn't raise her voice. I warned you the sync was off. Blake's eyes narrowed. Don't play clever. You touched the system. You said you saw a bug. Then this happens. Who else worked on it? Eli shifted from the far corner, stepping forward carefully, like the ground might crack beneath him. His voice was quiet, but it carried. She didn't cause it. She flagged it. No one listened. Blake turned his glare toward Eli, then back to Rey. He seemed ready to launch into another accusation, but Rey spoke first. I'll fix it, she said. If I fail, I'll leave. No second shot. The words landed with finality. No anger, no defensiveness, just a clear offer. Blake studied her, silent now, calculating. Then he gave a single nod, sharp and reluctant. You've got one night. He walked past her without another word. His boots echoed down the bay as he disappeared into the rear lot. No one moved for a long moment. Rey waited until the garage cleared. By dusk, even Owen had locked up early, muttering something about inventory reports. The depot's quiet settled like dust. Rey flipped on the overhead light in Bay 3 and pulled the ghost load into the center of the floor. The old wrench sat on her bench. The schematic she had drawn from memory lay beside it, edges curled. She started with a hard reset, disconnecting every interface point from the main processor. The torque relay whined once before falling silent. She removed the access panel, counted every fuse by hand, then tested the voltage by direct contact. She wasn't working from a manual, SMRT. The version installed in this ghost load didn't match anything printed. She was working from the design she had carried in her head for 4 years. The problem was subtle. A power drain loop embedded deep in the silent mode terrain handling protocol. It drew small, calculated pulses from the hybrid module under strain, designed to stabilize motion across rough grade. But whoever had patched the firmware last had misaligned the timing sequence. Under load, it triggered a fail state, not catastrophic, but deadly if you were mid-insertion on unfriendly terrain. Rey rewrote the sequence, not a workaround, a correction. She adjusted the heat tolerance margin by 2 degrees, realigned the torque output sequence, and relayered the fail-safe protocol to kick in at 72% strain instead of 90. She did it all from memory, with her hands moving faster than the processor's readout. She paused only once, to rub the fatigue from her eyes. Just after midnight, she ran the final simulation in isolation mode. The new logic held, no drops, no flutter. The loop sustained torque under every terrain variation she threw at it. She let the diagnostic run 3 more times, then shut the hood. She wiped the dust from the dash with a shop cloth and took a piece of scrap paper from the corner of the bench. In clean, even handwriting. She wrote 4 words. Now it works. Rey. She taped it to the dash directly over the manual override switch and turned out the bay light. The next morning, she arrived early, but the ghost load was already gone. Blake had picked it up before sunrise. She didn't ask anyone what time he'd come. She didn't need to. The garage fell into its usual rhythm, half-distracted conversation, the steady clank of tools, the rattle of rolling bins. Owen stayed mostly in his office. Nate worked without comment. Logan avoided eye contact. Eli gave her a look of quiet encouragement, then went back to sorting sensors. The sun had risen fully by the time Blake returned. No escort this time. Just him. The Humvee slid into Bay 3 like it belonged there, and he stepped out without waiting for someone to meet him. Rey was checking a lift alignment when he approached. She didn't stop working. She heard his footsteps, waited, then turned. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, expression unreadable. Then he held out the note. "You did this by hand?" "Yes." "No remote diagnostics? No AI? No third-party tools?" He nodded once, slowly, then again, deeper. He folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket. "What else can you fix?" Rey didn't smile. She just met his eyes. "Whatever you break." Blake gave a short breath of something that wasn't quite a laugh. Then he turned, walked back to the ghost load, and started it with a touch. The engine ran smooth, quiet, without resistance. As he pulled away, Eli stepped up beside her, holding a torque wrench. "Looks like you're staying." Rey nodded. Her hands were steady, her breath calm. She had never needed permission, only an opening. Now she had one, and the tools were already in her hands. The ghost load returned from its deployment with dust caked into its seams and a smooth purr in its engine that made every mechanic in the depot look up when it rolled through. Blake stepped out without ceremony, nodded once to Owen, and walked straight past everyone without a word. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Word spread faster than any official report. The torque recalibration held across unstable terrain. The stealth module fired in perfect sync with terrain shift. The hybrid core remained within thermal tolerance at all times. It was the best the ghost load had ever performed under real stress. No outside contractor had touched it. No additional diagnostics had been run. Just Rey, alone in the depot, with nothing but her tools and a memory too sharp to fade. By the end of the week, Owen started showing up early again. Logan asked to borrow a manual for the first time in months. Nate hovered around the schematic board longer than usual, occasionally scribbling questions in the margins. Eli, steady as ever, pulled apart one of the training harnesses and began to rebuild it based on Rey's notes. She had added a second bench to Bay 2, not for repair work, but for instruction. It wasn't a formal program. Not yet. Just a quiet shift in how things moved. When someone asked a question, Rey answered. When a diagram didn't make sense, she redrew it. She didn't act like a supervisor. She acted like someone who had seen the other side of the wall and come back with a blueprint. The Pentagon call came on a Thursday, just after lunch. Colonel Lane's voice was calm, direct, and free of any condescension. We're offering full reinstatement, he said. Your name restored, security clearance renewed, command over a new lab, hand-picked staff. We can fly you out Monday. Rey listened. She could picture the lab already glass walls, white floors, rows of clean benches. Her name etched again into the access badge, her signature on every design. She rested a hand on the edge of the bench. Eli was across the bay, rebuilding a guidance actuator with careful attention to every screw. I'm not chasing title anymore, Rey said softly. I'm building people. Lane didn't argue. He just paused, then said, If you change your mind, the door's open. She thanked him and ended the call. The phone rang again not long after. This time it was Frank. His voice carried an edge of satisfaction beneath the usual restraint. The NDA expired last month. He said, Grant is under review. Halden Mobility's internal records were subpoenaed. Turns out someone kept a copy of your original test logs with your name on every page. Rey didn't say much. She listened as Frank detailed the investigation, how executives were scrambling, how the court might reopen the case. She let it all pass through her like wind. Do you want me to draft a statement? Frank asked. Press will be interested. No, Rey said. Let them find something else to chase. She hung up and slid the phone into the drawer beside her workbench. At the bottom of that drawer, beneath a stack of calibration sheets, sat a plaque, heavy, metal, still wrapped in the original cloth. She had received it 5 years ago, back when she thought recognition could protect her. She didn't unwrap it. The next morning, a high-end black SUV pulled into the lot. The tires barely crunched the gravel. Paige stepped out, heels clicking against the concrete, makeup flawless, sunglasses perched high. She carried a leather folder and the expression of someone used to being listened to. Rey, she said with a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. You look comfortable. Rey nodded once, offering nothing else. Paige stepped inside the bay and glanced around, as if taking inventory. The board is ready to make things right. They understand now how critical your contributions were. We're offering you a full lab, your own team, any project you want. Rey said nothing. We'll handle the press. Paige continued. You won't need to defend yourself. We'll position it as a return. Quiet, respectful. We want you back where you belong. Rey walked to the bench and picked up a small part Eli had set down earlier. She examined it, turned it in her hand, then looked up. You needed me when it counted. Now I'm spoken for. Paige faltered. Rey, be reasonable. You're brilliant. Don't waste that on this. Rey gestured around the garage, the parts, the chalkboard, the rebuilt schematic pinned beside the lift. This is where the work happens. Not in press kits, not in staged labs. Here. Paige's smile thinned. Is that a no? It's a never. Paige left without another word. That afternoon, Eli walked over carrying the old wrench Rey had used to reset the Ghost Load's core. He handed it to her, unsure of what to say. I think this belongs to you. Rey looked at the wrench, then shook her head. No, it belongs to whoever earns it next. Eli blinked, then held it a little tighter. By the end of the week, the schematic board was full. Logan had added a new sequence for relay redundancy. Nate had diagrammed his first full subassembly. Rey stood at the edge of the bay and watched them work. She didn't need her name restored. She didn't need the building or the title or the plaque in her drawer. What she had now was better. She had built something no one could take from her. And this time, it would outlast her. Lockridge Tactical Depot no longer smelled only of oil and dust. It carried something else now. Chalk dust, warm circuits, graphite pencil marks, and soldered metal just cool enough to touch. Morning sunlight spilled through the high bay windows, cutting across rows of old lifts and new terminals. 3 teams worked around the central station. Eli stood at the far board, explaining voltage sequencing in quiet, measured phrases. Nate leaned over a torque map, sketching corrections in blue pen, while Logan adjusted firmware on an open panel. Lines of code rolling down the screen like slow-moving water. No one barked orders. No one hovered over shoulders. Everyone in the room had earned their place, and they worked like it mattered. Congressman Trent had called the program bloated, a stunt, a misuse of federal attention. His voice on the news had been sharp, insistent. He pointed to the depot and asked whether it was a repair shop or a monument to sentiment. Rey had sat quietly during the hearing, her hands folded, her answers direct. "It's a bridge," she said. When pressed to explain what qualified her students for continued funding, she did not recite test scores or quote metrics. She named them. These men didn't change. Someone finally gave them a map. By the time the hearing ended, the votes were in. The depot's contract was not only renewed, it was expanded. The program was marked for replication. 5 more sites across the country. Rey was invited to lead them. The invitation sat unopened on her workbench. She read the subject line once, then let the email rest. She understood what it would mean. Travel, responsibility, visibility, all the things she had once run from. But today, here, something better was unfolding. Her wrench, the one she had used on the ghost load, was now bolted to the wall above the main board. Not polished, not framed. Just there, solid and silent, a reminder of what could happen when someone refused to be erased. Rey moved through the depot with a pace that matched the room. No rush, no hesitation. She stopped beside a new student, a young woman seated cross-legged near the auxiliary lift. She was sketching a schematic on graph paper, brow furrowed, pencil tapping against her knee. The lines weren't perfect, but the thinking was right. Rey knelt beside her. She didn't correct anything. She didn't offer instruction. She simply looked, then nodded once. The student glanced up, surprised by the attention, and smiled. Rey smiled back. That was enough. The noise of the depot filled the air again. Quiet voices, soft tool clicks, the hum of screens and hands at work. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't newsworthy. But it was real. Rey looked around the room one more time. At Nate, grinning as he explained system lag to 2 younger techs. At Logan, laughing at something Eli said while refitting a guidance unit. At the young woman already turning her page to begin a second draft. Rey didn't need to say yes to anything else. She had already answered. The proof was moving through the bay, wire by wire, line by line, voice by voice. And it would keep going, long after she stopped speaking. Rey never chased titles. She never raised her voice or demanded attention, but through quiet action, unwavering skill, and a refusal to stay invisible, she changed everything. What began as dismissal became quiet recognition. What was once exile became influence. Rey did not return to reclaim a spotlight. She built something better without it. Her strength was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about showing what happens when you stand your ground, work with purpose, and lift others along the way. This is not just a story about a mechanic. It is about dignity, hidden talent, and the power of staying true to yourself even when the world tries to look away. If Rey's journey resonated with you, we invite you to reflect, share your thoughts in the comments, or follow for more quiet, powerful stories like this one. Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that never had to shout.